All right, everybody. We are back with some cyber AB content, training and town hall content, some burst of joy, as we like to call it. And we've got a lot of big things to discuss. Luckily for us, at the drop of the hat, when we had to produce this episode, the cyber AB and the CMMC program gave us a couple gifts on the fourth day of Christmas, right? Delivering to us the Code of Professional Conduct in a revised fashion and the CMMC Assessment Process Guide, both the CAP, the CoPC 2.0. There's a lot of stuff that we're in there, and this week we're going to talk about it. Welcome back, Joy.
Thank you. I'm surprised you didn't start off by celebrating the birth, the actual birth of CMMC.
We tried to get producer Dustin to set up a whole nativity scene where it was like Matt Travis as like Jesus, like like all the people, Stacey Bostjanic as the Virgin Mary
on the other side.
That's the things that we were thinking about. Creative stepped in, legal stepped in. Plus, we really like the work that all of those people have done that have gotten us to this point. It's really weird for us to think, Joy, that we were just talking about this before the show. But some of us are 7 or 8 years into this journey, and we're celebrating the birth of something that is actually just getting started, right? So it's like we were 7 years BCMMC, right? Like, so instead of before Christ, 7 years BCMMC. And so now we're here. The CAP documents are out. And if for anybody that is wondering what the CAP and what the Code of Professional Conduct is, realistically is the guiding light for anybody in the ecosystem, depending on what you're doing, right? The Code of Professional Conduct tells you that as an ecosystem professional, this is the way that you are expected to behave. You sign a contract. This is what you're supposed to do. Wherein the CMMC Assessment Process Guide, right, is the guide that all assessors are supposed to use as a guiding light when conducting CMMC certification assessments, so that assessments are not only fair, but they're kind of uniform in nature when they're being conducted, right? These are the things that have to go through. Later on, I think on next week's show, Jacob and I are going to discuss just a couple things with the CAP. But for this episode, Joy, we figured we would spread our wings and we would dive in and, come up with maybe, 3, 4, 5, 7. 7 sounds like a good number. Let's do 7 takeaways that we both have come together from the 2.0 versions of the CAP and the CoPC. What do you think?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
I want to kick it off with my first one. As somebody that has to teach these, as somebody that has to live by these, as somebody has to instruct these. Well, actually, let's start with the first, utmost important thing is that these are not drafts, Joy. These are effective. And let me make sure that I get the term absolutely correct. Effective and enforced documents. On the CAP, on the revision page, there is a draft. I saw that. There were some conversations on LinkedIn, so I had to reach out to some people behind the scenes and say, what's going on? Hi, people make mistakes. These are big documents, 51 pages. It seems to be a mistake. These wouldn't be drafts, because if there are comments on these and those comments do lead to revisions, then version 2.0 of these documents then would trans into version 2.1 or 2.1.1 or something like that. It would be a new revision that would go in that cycle. Would you agree, Joy?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't. It's not like a rule where everybody's going to say, I like this part, I don't like this part. No, these are actual policies that you must adhere to, or these are actual processes that you must adhere to as a part of this program.
Right. And so it means there isn't room for improvement, and improvements would be made down the road.
Right? This is 100% true. And on these, on the CAP, not on the CoPC, there's a disclaimer. And anybody that is familiar with the disclaimer, I kind of want to talk about it for a second, but it's basically in writing the things that are said at the beginning of every town hall. This isn't an official DoD position. This doesn't take authority over the DoD. And if the DoD makes changes to their program, which affect the outcome of this document, guess what wins? The DoD. It's not new. It's not. It's just something that has to put in there. They could essentially have put, we are going to state the obvious on this page, and we would have been good to go. And then that's exactly what they did. Stated the obvious. We work kind of underneath the DoD to carry out a program for the DoD. What they say goes. The other thing, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, as somebody that has to teach these, as somebody that has to live by these documents, Joy, they are very well written. as far as in comparison
So
to
much better than the 1.0 versions. Well, especially for the CAP. The
the
CoPC hasn't changed that much, but the CAP, man, it's changed substantially.
it just flows. It just makes
Mhm.
sense. There's an actual segmentation to it. In reading, I noticed something off with the numbering, but I ignored the numbering and it went with straightly with the messaging, making sure that it just happened in the process. And I can tell you, as somebody that has to teach this again, as somebody that has to live by this and abide by this CAP document is light years better than what we've had to live with and teach for the past 2 years. And I hope that the ecosystem agrees.
Yep.
Let's jump, Joy, into one of the first things that you pointed out to me, and then when we were talking about it, we were like, "Wow, this is a little different because of where it appears, not because of what it is, because of what document it appears in." And the first thing I want to call your attention to is in the Code of Professional Conduct, and it's at the bottom of page 14. The last section in the last paragraph in section 3.4, which that section is non-certification assessments. I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to tell me what you think it means, Joy.
Okay.
This section states that the C3PAO shall retain the results deliverables of all non-certification assessments conducted for the prior 3 years. The results deliverables shall be made available to the Cyber AB upon a reasonable request for purposes of review during a CMMC authorization renewal or accreditation assessment of the C3PAO by the Cyber AB. What do you think that means? And then I'll kind of let you know what I think it means.
The key context here, I want to make sure everyone understands, is that this is following the description of doing a mock assessment or a basically what would normally be a self-attestation non-certification assessment. So an OSC, it's not the formal assessment of record, but an OSC decides at their annual review time when they're supposed to do their self-assessment, or if they're CMMC level 2 self-assessment requirements only without a for record certification, that they're going to have a C3PAO do it for them instead. So rather than doing it themselves, they have a C3PAO do it. And I just thought it was interesting that this is in the conflict of interest category, right, on the Code of Professional Conduct, that they say, well, if you're a C3PAO and you do a non-certification assessment for an OSC, you have to hang on to the results of that. And if the Cyber AB asks to see those results, you have to share them.
Yeah.
And wow, because think if the OSC was doing the self-assessment without having a C3PAO, the Cyber AB wouldn't have access to that. But because the C3PAO did it, they now have to make it available to the Cyber AB if the Cyber AB requests it. Now, it does say that it would be for the potential purpose of review during a authorization renewal or an accreditation assessment of the C3PAO. So it sounds like it's for quality check purposes. Would you say that that's maybe why they would want to have access to self-assessment or non-certification assessment records from a C3PAO?
Yeah, so what I think in just analyzing what we see here in the document in which it appears in, I think that last line that you pointed out is very vital here. You're going to have to keep records of the non-certification assessments that you have, because the certification assessments that you conduct, the records of those are actually uploaded somewhere, so that can be viewed by somebody else. The non-certification, I think it is actually just to make sure that you are adhering to the Code of Professional Conduct, because this appears in the Code of Professional Conduct when conducting the assessments, because it says that you have to refrain from doing this, you have to refrain from doing that. And I think what this is a check and balance to make sure that when the results aren't necessarily readily available to the Cyber AB, but they need to make sure that you're operating within the lines and doing what you're supposed to do, that this is actually a kind of a CYA action for them when they go through and reauthorize you to say that you are capable of doing this. That's my personal opinion. I think so. But as always, what's the point in doing a show if you don't rely on the fans every once in a while? So if anybody thinks that we are interpreting this incorrectly or has anything else to add, like obviously our comments are always open, slide in the DMs. We'll figure it out from there, right?
Yeah, that part may be innocuous, honestly, but I look at it and I think, so what happens though if the Cyber AB reviews a non-certification assessment that a C3PAO conducted and says, oh, you didn't do this right at all. You
Right.
didn't follow you didn't gather evidence, or you
Well, so
didn't
then isn't that's actually
validate the self-assessment that is now in the SPRS score. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like it opens a can of worms potentially.
right? But so proper use of methods comes into play here, right? So
Yeah.
I understand that this is where it's at in the COPC, but I think when you're looking at the situation, I think proper use of methods definitely comes in there, because are you conducting these assessments in adherence with the documents that are supposed to be the guide and light again, right? Are you doing the things? Are you not sliding in some consulting in there to make extra 20K on the gig and the engagement, whatever it is? I can see it's policing is what it is. Like the case in point, I really think it's just policing and an ability for them to have something to review to make sure, again, when the watchful eye and the assessment results aren't uploaded and reviewed by the cyber AB or the quality control people, if those things take place. My next point, this one, we had been back and forth with. I'm glad that we got clarity on it in the Code of Professional Conduct. It affects both of us, obviously, and there was a lot of uproar in the ecosystem when the rule came out, and some of the things, the terminology that was put in the rule, having to do with instructors and their ability to consult if they're an instructor, right? And a lot of people interpreted it that at the time, before the Code of Professional Conduct 2.0 was released, to mean that if I was an instructor, I was not allowed to consult ever, never. I can either teach or I can help, right? Like, you know what I mean? Even though teaching is helping, I can be a helper and make money for profit doing the help, or I can teach and, you know, give to the community. So that's how a lot of people interpret it. But in CAP 2.0, Appendix B, Section B2, Paragraph M, going to read from the text again. I know that's boring, but we'll do it fast. Basically, consultants are not allowed, do not provide CMMC consulting services while serving as a CMMC instructor. That should be the line that goes there, but there's more explanation. This restriction prohibits, its explanation to make it clear, there's no confusion, prohibits the instructor from providing consulting services or offering targeted advice to the students while in the act of providing classroom, in-person, or virtual instruction, but does not necessarily prevent the instructor from providing consulting services as a separate professional activity outside the CMMC classroom. So,
Common sense has prevailed?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Because, and I want to give a perspective here. I've been a student and I have been a teacher. All of us have, because you had to get the certification to teach, right? As a student, I have been in classrooms, and a teacher, I have been in classrooms where the questions being asked aren't more specific for the student to better understand the implementation of a control, moreover, to better understand the implementation of control in their environment, in their particular scenario, and then it takes over the class. So from the instructor, I appreciate things like this going in there to have something to point back to be like, hey, can't get too specific into your scenario, but let's talk about some more applied knowledge. There is a way to teach with applied knowledge without teaching with applied specific or specificity in the knowledge that you're teaching. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think this happens often with the good instructors too, is that the way that we answer questions that seem to be a targeted question or specific to an environment is always with the caveat of, being mindful that the scope could include many things that impact how this is implemented. The description of the control and the mechanism that you are providing seems to make sense. But we're not going to say we'll pass an assessment without, first of all, in a classroom environment ever. We're not going to say that ever. But also always with the caveat of, anything that we're discussing for implementation purposes, you have to know the entire scope and the interrelation and the boundary, right? All of the assets involved in order to give quality consulting advice. So it would never happen in the classroom.
Yeah.
It shouldn't happen in the classroom.
Yeah, it should not. And I think that this is one of those things that on both sides, it kind of stops it from happening.
Yep.
But now instructors can be consultants because, like, why would you not want the sage, wise professor of a topic being the person that's helping organizations that don't understand it get through it, right? Like, I'm not
Right.
saying that I'm sage and wise. I'd like to think I'm young and sparky, but we won't talk
Right.
about what year I was born. So let's move on to my final thing that I want to point out from both documents. And then I want to get into some of the really spicy ones that you've pointed out. We did my dull ones first so that we can heat up the episode a little bit, right? But this one in particular is from the CAP, and it has to deal with FedRAMP authorized clouds and kind of the process that a C3PAO would have to go through to validate a cloud, whether it was FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP moderate equivalent, which is still a thing. Who knows for how long? But we'll talk about that when we cross there. And essentially, I want to read again during the assessment from the text, kind of, I'm going to summarize. I'm not going to read it because they're big paragraphs. We'll put them on the screen for you guys to see as I'm reading them. But the summary of this is that the difference between an OSA using an authorized CSP would be with an authorized FedRAMP CSP. The C3PO would simply go to the FedRAMP marketplace, validate that particular CSP is on the FedRAMP marketplace, and then accept the CRM as absolute from that particular cloud service offering, wherever it's particularly sprinkled in there. Now, you can't go to Microsoft Cloud or whatever cloud it is that has a FedRAMP authorization and then just say, bam, here's the Microsoft CRM. They do everything for me. That's not how it works. But in the parts where Microsoft comes into play in your assurance claim, which is the claim, the implementation statement that defends your implementations, now the Microsoft stuff isn't questioned ever, right? Because it's got that authorization. Hold fast. We see your concept of operations. We see your implementation. Microsoft covers that portion. Yes, the other things that you have put together, your documentation, your data flow diagrams, whatever it is, demonstrates that. It just gives absoluteness to the Microsoft or the FedRAMP authorized clouds portion. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Okay. Where it differs for a FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud is here. FedRAMP moderate equivalent clouds will have to produce a body of evidence to demonstrate that they met the equivalency and somebody signed off for it, went through the assessment. Hi, ABC Cloud did this. They meet the equivalency standards set by the DoD through memo, blah, 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 blah. And then a huge body of evidence that comes behind it, which is everything that defends their implementations. Your C3PAO will not go control by control through 853 moderate baseline and say, your cloud did that. The body of evidence will demonstrate that. But what they will do is they will go through for a FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud service provider and verify that the body of evidence is complete, all the required elements are there, that it is intact, that each element of the body evidence is presented in full and not missing critical sections. There's not things omitted from it. It is in its original version, integrity of documentation, and then established periodicity, which is very, very, very vital. A lot of times cloud service providers fall out of compliance. They're no longer on the marketplace. Or you may have a body of evidence that you used in 2022, right? That is not periodic evidence. Periodic evidence falls within the threshold period of that cloud's authorization. So they're going to validate that all the evidence that you're presented covers the time frame for the cloud that you're using and the authorization that they have and the time you're getting assessed.
And it's going back to the FedRAMP authorized, I think right now Microsoft is in that equivalency the reason I mentioned that is that we had to download the entire body of evidence for Microsoft GCC High, both Azure and 365. And if for anybody that's never looked at the body of evidence before for FedRAMP moderate, holy smokes, it is quite a bit. I mean, we have to, first of all, make sure that you're providing the right tenant information and everything to validate that you own a tenant and or should have access to this information. The OSC is the one that's supposed to be downloading that and preparing it for the assessor to review. So it's an extraordinary amount of evidence to go through. And boy, for the C3PAOs that need to validate that everything is there, for a FedRAMP equivalent body of evidence package, it's a substantial amount of data to go through and validate that.
And so when you get in those cases, and Microsoft being in the case, but when you get in those cases where a moderate body of evidence has to be validated, that could potentially increase the scope of your assessment, cost of your assessment, whatever it may be, because there's more work that needs to be done. So this is, again, things that by the CAP, the C3PAO will discuss with the OSA to come out with the best solution.
Yeah.
I am now super duper excited to get into your takeaways, your biggest takeaways that you have, because there's a couple spicy ones in there, and some that, like the instructor in consulting, conundrum that we were presented, are kind of things that people were waiting on to see what these documents would guide us if they would do the right thing. And so, what you got?
I'm going to start with one that's not really spicy, and it's actually kind of reverse conversation happening here of the thing that's not in the CAP that I had really wanted to see. I have a couple, actually. The first one is that there's no guidance on what kind of body of evidence the C3PAO is expecting for a cloud service provider that hosts security protection data. Not CUI, because we know that that's FedRAMP moderate equivalent, right? But a cloud service provider that hosts security protection data has a different requirement, should be assessed against NIST 800-171 and demonstrate and provide to their customers who are using them as a security protection asset the shared responsibility matrix. So either the CRM or the SRM, depending on what you want to refer to it as. And I did email the DoD and ask them to clarify what exactly they're going to be expecting a C3PAO to look for, or an OSC to provide in respect to the security protection data that's housed on a cloud service provider. And that's what it came back with, is really that they're going to have it documented in the OSC's system security plan and described in the external service provider's service description and customer responsibility matrix. And I think that a lot of folks are going to be kind of caught by surprise with that, because there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of security services, SaaS platforms, if you will, where security protection data is actually located. And I don't know that C3PAOs really have it on their radar to look for the SRM and that information built into the system security plan of the OSC. And I think a lot of those vendors have no idea that they should be getting that ready and providing that to all of the organizations that are leveraging their service, their platform. So that's one part. Another thing I didn't see in there, Jason, and maybe this is a little bit spicier, that I wish would have been in there, is addressing how a OSC who's looking for an external service provider, like a managed service provider, how they can go to one place and find out which MSPs are CMMC level 2. Because if they went through the trouble of having a voluntary CMMC level 2 certification, it seems like there should be one marketplace repository, similar to the Cyber AB, where they could go and put a filter check mark on MSP or ESP to see who's already received their certification. And that's not mentioned anywhere in the CAP. I don't know that it would necessarily have to be in the CAP, but information about how do they know? Like if their MSP says, I had my CMMC level 2 certification, I'm good. Is there any, authority they can go to validate that? I guess it's the C3PAO has to.
The body of evidence that's presented by the external service provider. See, what we were looking for is some reciprocity, right? Or we were looking for some button that would make this quicker. And there may be, and we had a conversation with Fernando Machado from CyberSec Investments last week on the show. And there may be a thing where like a CMMC certification may demonstrate that. But when a voluntary assessment takes place for an MSP or an ESP or something like that, they're going to receive something that's going to validate that. And that's going to come from an authorized C3PAO. At some point in time, maybe just like the conundrum with FedRAMP moderate equivalency, even though it's not dictated in there, maybe that can be presented with the CRM to make an absolute status of the CRM, right? Maybe if a provider went out and got a voluntary assessment, I don't know, for their service offering, right? And then that service offering itself and the SRM, CRM that's defended with it, I don't know, had the backing of a C3PAO assessment, then that may, in lieu, make it easier, right? Because then the evidence has a little bit more credibility that comes behind it.
Yeah.
I still think
Well,
Okay.
that is the spicy part that I was going to get to, but I think that just the way that it addresses FedRAMP and FedRAMP equivalency for cloud service providers, but really doesn't address the equivalency or the CMMC level 2 certification as far as what is an assessor looking for.
Mhm.
And how does the OSC know what they need? That feels like that was pretty ambiguous and or not addressed appropriately on the cap. But that does get to my final takeaway from the
Okay.
cap that I was shocked by because, first of all, I don't like being wrong. I don't know about you, Jason, but I was sure.
No,
I
I've
was
never
sure.
actually, unless you're my wife, I've
Oh,
never actually been wrong. Like only in my wife's eyes. And even when we're both wrong, I'm actually wrong. She just is never wrong, right? Like so, it's
it's a good healthy marriage you have.
I I know my role. Like let's be honest here. Like,
But I'll tell you, I have been out there, common sense again,
hmm
thinking, well, if there is a FedRAMP where a cloud service provider has already been validated by a third party, and that package of evidence now means that the cloud service provider is not sitting at the table during the OSC assessment and
hmm
speaking to how they're performing the capabilities on behalf of the OSC, that the same thought process would apply to an external service provider like an MSP.
okay.
And what that means is that it's going to be less expensive for the MSP if they wouldn't have to participate in every single assessment because they got their own
hmm
CMMC level 2 certification and they're providing the SSP, the shared responsibility matrix,
hmm
and the validation from a C3PAO that they went through and got their own certification, that there should be a concept of either, I don't know if inheritance is the right word. I feel like non-duplication is a better representation of what that is. For the OSC to now say, well, my MSP, this is the shared responsibility matrix. Here's my contract with them that says that I'm buying this part of the shared responsibility matrix. They've already gone through their assessment, so they don't need to participate. You're going to assess me only on what I'm responsible for or partially responsible for. And then that collapses the amount of effort that the C3PAO has to expend to give the OSC their certification, which reduces the dollar amount associated. And the MSP has now gone through it once and it applies to many. Like that's the ideal world. And for me to see the wording in the cap that the assessment team should anticipate and accept a lower level of effort on behalf of the ESP during the OSC's assessment if the OSC is using an MSP who has their own CMMC level 2 certification. What does lower level of effort mean, Jason? That is, I'm sorry, but that for one assessor could mean I'm going to spot check 50% of the controls that the MSP says. It could mean
Some
5
MSPs are
controls,
80%,
right?
some are 77%.
A lower
So
level of effort. And then it also says that the MSP has to participate through the full assessment, even if they have their own CMMC level 2 certification. Let's do some napkin math. Can we do that
okay,
real quick?
yeah, I
I love Brian Hubbard always used to say his napkin math. So I did my handy dandy calculator and I'm like, okay, let's say on the very low end, an
mhm,
MSP charges $150 an hour for out of contract work. So anything
mhm.
not covered, all inclusive, that they're doing special. And I would think a lot of MSPs are going to say, hey, whenever you're ready for your assessment, I'm going to charge you by the hour and I'll have my CMMC qualified person available, which now means that they're probably going to be a CCP, probably, you hope, at
You
least
would
very well versed so that they don't screw the assessment for the OSC. Pardon my language.
so hold on, real quick, so that
Okay.
we don't get in the same conundrum that we were, so we don't get in the same scenario, so the pitchforks aren't lit. Like, yeah, a CCP or somebody that has demonstrated experience with auditing, preparation, and stuff like that, that didn't choose to go through the route, right? Because
Right.
a lot of
So
people
my
when
point is
we
that's
had our
that's a high value asset, that
yeah,
person.
yes, it's somebody
That's
that
not
is
a
experienced.
$60 an hour person, right? That's
No.
for what they're charging their customers. They're a minimum $150 an hour. Most MSPs are going to cover minimum 60, 70, 75, 80% of the shared responsibility matrix, which means that, let's say that they are going to sit in on a 40-hour assessment. They're going to sit in for at least 30 hours of that to answer the questions. Napkin math, $150 an hour, 30 hours, that's $4,500 that the OSC has to pay now, where I just don't understand the why. Give me the why on that
in
one.
additional to support and to on top of the cost that they've paid for whatever technical resources that they got from that company that's coming to defend them, on top of whatever migration costs costs that are there, on top of the agreement costs with the C3PAO, on top of the reoccurring costs to keep it going. So at some point in time, like, you wonder, why are we over budget and then we're buying $200,000 gold toilets, right? Like, so it's just a thing of like, we just have to make sure that we make the right decisions every step along the way, especially in budgeting, that we don't dig ourselves into a hole that we're not going to be able to come out of. And I think that that is prudent information for every person when they're looking for an ESP. But there's not that program stood up right now, right? There's not a FedRAMP program for MSPs right now, which is probably why there's nothing in language. But since there is no program stood up, I know that we both are a part of an effort. I think that there's something that you have been working on in the back end with other people with regards to the collective and maybe a marketplace.
Well, yeah, circling back to the marketplace, the MSP collective is, we talked about this last night. We're going to talk about it with our members again today, but I think that we're going to be for free offering to be the repository for MSPs that have gone through their CMMC level 2 certification, so that they can be listed in one location. It doesn't mean they can't be listed in others, but for everyone, and we'll have to come up with what the guidelines are, so that, you know, because we would probably want the C3PAO to provide the validation to us at the MSP collective that, yes, this MSP, and you know, a link to their website, the date of the certification, some basic information that we would be collecting, so that there would be an online repository in absence of the Cyber AB being able to house something like that and manage it. And we're going to work out the minutia of what happens if they lose their certification, or what happens if they're acquired by another company and so they're in limbo waiting for their scope and recertification to happen, stuff like that we really have to think through. But we're excited that we believe that the collective can at least perform a service to the entire ecosystem in getting something like that together, be a great resource for OSCs. And then also, I'm hopeful that the problem of non-duplication for those MSPs that are getting their CMMC level 2 assessment, I'm hoping that can be something that we work through and improve with the CMMC program, because the cost savings to the OSC and even the cost savings to the smaller MSPs who really want to be able to do this, they want to stay in, keep their DIB customers that they've had for 10, 15 years. You know what those relationships are like. You don't want to have to hand them over to another MSP. And if you feel like you can do CMMC, you don't want to lose your most important resource a week at a time, every time they have to go through a certification, the end customer, right? So it's harder for the MSP, it's harder for the end customer. It costs an awful lot of money on both sides. And so if they're going to all that trouble and expense to get their own certification, I'm hopeful that's something that we can remedy in version 2.1.
Well, if there's anything that you see in any of these documents that you want changed, right? There's things that you feel you want to enact change on. To submit comments for the CAP, it's capcomments@cyberab.org. And for submit comments for the Code of Professional Conduct, it's CoPC comments@cyberab.org. Just a couple things before we get out of here. Glad we're back. I think next month, more than likely, we might not have some Joy just because of some stuff that we've got going internally. So we'll just have to wait a little bit for Joy, but let's hope the timelines line up and we get you here. But with that being said, some things that we are super excited about that are in the near future, right? Or that are coming up. Sorry. Every Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern, CUI Hotline, Jacob and Daniel If you can't catch their live show, which is very entertaining, funny, and informative, there's also the hotline for you to dial. And producer Dustin will put that number at the bottom of the screen for you in case you have these questions with this new cap release, this CoPC, and you want those guys to hop on camera and answer it live so that you can listen and feel like you're part of the show. Make sure that you submit those. The other big one, and I'm excited about this, CS2 is back this spring in Reston. Reston is a beautiful city outside of Washington, D.C., for those that don't know that. May 6th, May 7th, I'm sure I will see you there. You will see me there. It is in my hometown, which is very convenient for me. I don't live in Reston. I live in the area. But for our loyal listeners, like we are accustomed to doing, we have a discount code for 15% off of your registration. That discount code is all caps, Sum It Up Reston, SUMITUPRESTON, SUMITUPRESTON, Sum It Up Reston, 15% off. So you can come hang out with me, Joy, Jacob, Daniel, the rest of the good people at Summit 7, producer Dustin, get the new swag, hear the latest and greatest for anything to do with CMMC, federal regulations, cloud security, and compliance. I'm excited. I love CS2s. I love the atmosphere. And this will officially be the first CS2 since the birth of CMMC.
I love CS2s.
I just
Love
like
them.
the interaction. And with that being said, Joy, thanks for joining me this for this show this month. And then I will see you in a couple months maybe. But for everybody else in the audience, see you next week.